Hello everyone, my name is Puneet and I am from the IMS PG India team, and today we are going to discuss the day 2 slot 1 analysis of CET 2021. Okay, so today was the second day of CET, and the first slot of the second day, the overview of the first slot of the second day is on your screens. Actually, the first slot of the second day threw up a couple of surprises, mainly in the quant and the verbal ability section. Okay, we are going to discuss these as we go ahead. First, let's just have an overview. Now, were there any differences in the pattern per se, as in the interface of the test? So in the interface of the test, compared to yesterday, compared to day one, there were no changes. All the sections were mixed up with one another. There were no separate sections of quant, DILR, or logical reasoning, or verbal ability and reading comprehension. Okay. So this was a major difference from previous year's CET. Okay. And as always, there were no negative marking for any incorrectly attempted questions. Okay. Interface wise, there was one change compared to previous year's CET, that the buttons such as previous, next, mark for review, those were at the bottom of the screen. Okay. So that's one minor change in the interface. Now, let's see the approximate breakup. Quantitative aptitude had around 55 to 60 questions. Most of these questions were easy. However, there was one nasty surprise, which we'll discuss. Logical reasoning had 80 to 85 questions. Logical reasoning contains non-verbal and verbal reasoning both. Okay, not abstract reasoning, but all other types of reasoning. So that was around 80 to 85 questions. Verbal ability and reading comprehension again had a big surprise, which we are going to discuss. But it had the usual 45 to 50 questions. Okay, and abstract reasoning had around 10 questions. Now, verbal ability and reading comprehension, the level of difficulty compared to previous years was slightly higher. It cannot be called easy. It cannot be called very difficult. Okay, it was a moderate difficulty level. Logical reasoning also was easy to moderate. Okay, and abstract reasoning was not extremely easy. So it was moderate. It was not very difficult also. It could have been solved, but it was time consuming, somewhat time consuming. So it was moderate. Okay. First, let's discuss the quant. Quant had a nasty surprise, as I said, and that nasty surprise you can see in the topics. There were around 6 to 8 questions of limit, differentiation, integration. Okay, very unexpected and unfamiliar topics. All right, but out of almost 60 questions, you have 6 to 8 questions of this. So, without wasting any time, what students should have done, and what many students did also, as I spoke to them at the center, was they just marked it randomly, because that's the beauty of no negative marking. You can just mark it randomly and move ahead to questions which you actually know and which you actually have practiced. And there were a lot of these questions: arithmetic, geometry, modern maths, and numbers. Okay, they form the major chunk of quantitative aptitude questions. Okay, you can very well see 12 questions of arithmetic and 12 questions of modern math, 10 questions of geometry, 7 questions of numbers, 4 questions of algebra. These are all approximate figures, obviously, as there were no clearly defined sections in the paper. But major chunk was this, all right? And all of these had expected question types. So overall, if we saw the quant section, overall, it was slightly easier than previous year's quant sections of CET. Okay. Now, the reasoning section, specifically the logical reasoning section. Logical reasoning has non-verbal reasoning, analytical reasoning, as well as verbal reasoning. Non-verbal reasoning, which had arrangements, family trees, coding, selection criteria, sequential output, etc., had around 65 questions. Now, there was again a surprise in the question arrangement in non-verbal reasoning. What was that? That was in the arrangement sets. You had around 5 sets of arrangements. Okay, from one set of data, you could answer almost 3 questions. There were 5 such sets. But one question of one set, if it was at question 5, then another question of that same set could appear at question 20, 15 questions apart. And the third question could appear 5 to 10 questions after question 20. Okay, so the questions in the sets, at least 2 to 3 sets, were all spread apart. Okay, scattered through the CET. All right, that could have caused problems for some students. All right, otherwise non-verbal reasoning was very expected on expected lines. Verbal reasoning also, around 18 to 20 questions were verbal reasoning, and they were also around expected lines. You had the usual suspects of statement conclusion, statement course of action, situation response, which is another very similar question to statement course of action. You had one statement assumption and critical reasoning question each, and assertion reasoning and syllogism. All of these, none of these questions are very new. Okay, all of these have been asked previously in the CET. Okay, around 80 to 85 questions of logical reasoning, and around 10 questions of abstract reasoning, basically questions like series completion and paper cutting. All right, now the VARC section, verbal ability and reading comprehension section. The reading comprehension and verbal ability section had around 50 questions. Okay, 45, anywhere between 45 and 50 questions. Out of these, 10 questions were RC, reading comprehension. Now the surprise here was that there was no passage which had more than one question. Okay, there were 10 passages, each of them had one question each, but they were not very lengthy. Okay, the longest passage was around 250 words, and over 200 words, there were only 3 passages which looked like they were over 200 words. Okay, rest of the passages were anywhere between 60 to 150, 180 words. Okay, so very short passages. Out of the 10 questions, 5 questions were pretty easily answered. Okay, they were very manageable. You could, some of the questions were even such that if you read the question and then go to search for the answer, you could easily find the answer. Okay, so though the RCs were not asked as sets of questions, like 5 to 6 questions from one passage as always, but still it was easier or manageable to answer the RCs. Vocabulary and grammar was again through a big surprise, because there were no grammar questions. There were only vocabulary questions. Some people might think that there was one grammar question, but it was also a vocabulary question in disguise. What was that? That was a one-word substitution question. Okay, where one had to answer what is a collective noun for a group of whales. The answer was GAM, GAM. Okay, but basically that is also testing your vocabulary only. It is not actually testing the concept of collective nouns. Okay, so there were no grammar questions. Overall, there were around 45 to 50, as I said, verbal ability questions. Most of them were vocabulary, fill in the blanks with one blank, very simple fill in the blanks. There were 5 such questions. Okay, there were 2 short passages. Okay, in each of those passages, one word was underlined. Okay, and from the options, you had to find out a synonym of that underlined word. There were 2 such questions, again very easy. You need not even if you read that one sentence in which that underlined word is, you will be able to find the synonym. You need not read the entire passage to answer that word. That was also easy. Okay, jumbled paragraph. Now, very big difference from the format of CET jumbled paragraph questions. CET generally asks jumbled paragraph questions as sets. You have 5 to 6 statements you have to arrange, and then they ask what is the first sentence, what is the second sentence. But it was not like that. There were 5 to 6 jumbled paragraph questions. All of them had 5 statements, and they were very standard. You were given options, okay, of sequences. You just had to identify what is the right sequence from the options. Okay, so again, pretty simple jumbled paragraph questions, very manageable. Odd sentence from word meaning pairs. So this question is also a very common CET type question. It has been asked earlier in CET. Okay, there is a word and its meaning as a pair given. There are 5 such pairs given in option. One option does not have the correct word and meaning and its meaning. So that is your answer. That is the odd one out of word meaning pairs. Okay. And there were around 8 such questions. Again, there were around 6 to 8 questions of spellings also, out of which 3 were very tough. Okay. Very obscure spellings. But out of the remaining 5, people could have answered around 3 questions. One word substitution were also asked, passage based one word substitution. So some people might have thought that these were RCs, but these were actually one word substitutions. Okay, even if, so what was there? There was an entire passage in which a group of words was underlined. You had to identify from the options one word which can replace that group of words. So basically it was again a test of vocabulary. I'll just give you an example. Again, one word substitutions were slightly off the track. Okay, for example, there was a group of words which was underlined 125 years. You have to identify from the options one word for 125 years. The correct answer is quasi-quincentennial. Okay, so quasi-quincentennial, if you know, then you know. If you don't know, then you just mark whatever you want to and move ahead. You should not waste time on such questions. Okay, if there are options which you don't understand at all, just mark randomly and move ahead. Anagram based odd one out. There were 2 to 3 such questions. Basically, there was a word given, a longish word, like for example, intransigent was one such word. And there were, in the 5 options, you were given 5 to 6 letter words. Intransigent is a very long word. Okay. But in the options, only 5 to 6 letter words were given, out of which 4 words could be formed from the letters of the word intransigent itself. Okay, one word could not be formed from the letters of the word intransigent. You have to find that word. That is the anagram based odd one out question. There were 5 very direct antonym questions, and as we had discussed, 10 reading comprehension questions. In the 10 reading comprehension questions, okay, as I said, some 3 to 5 questions could have been answered directly also by reading the question and searching for the answer in the passage. Okay, there were questions like identify the tone of the passage, identify the source material of the passage. Okay, so very standard RC questions, nothing very new. Overall, even in the verbal reasoning part, major chunk of the questions in verbal reasoning was formed by statement conclusion questions. Okay, there were around 8 to 9 statement conclusion questions out of the 20 questions. Okay, some of these questions, around 4 questions, had 5 conclusions, out of which you have to choose the correct conclusion, and the remaining questions, remaining 4 to 5 questions of statement conclusion had 2 conclusions, out of which you had to identify whether first is correct, second is correct, both are correct, neither is correct, and so on. Okay, so those were also of the standard difficulty level of CET, not any more or any less. So those were manageable. All right. Overall, out of the 200 questions, genuine attempt of 155 to 160 questions is expected in this slot. Okay. I wish you all the best for your results. Thank you.